G'day everyone. Can everyone hear me up the back? Yep, fantastic. I'm Ebony Bennett. I'm Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and thank you for joining us for our inaugural Queanbeyan Politics in the Pub. Thanks for coming out tonight. We've been doing politics in the pub for about 14 years over in Canberra, and I'm really ashamed we haven't been across the border. So we just really appreciate everyone coming out, particularly when it's so bloody cold. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. We really, really appreciate it. I want to acknowledge that I live and work on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country and pay my respects to elders past and present. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And in 2024, the Australia Institute, we're a think tank based just over the border, and we're celebrating our 30th anniversary this year as Australia's leading think tank. That's 30 years of big ideas. We're very proud, and it is end of financial year. So if I'm going to shake the tin just very briefly, we don't get any government funding. That's not an ask, Kristy. But we do rely on donations. So if you are in a position to, please head on over to australiainstitute.org.au to chip in if you can. And you can double your donation at the moment. We've got a matching donation offer on, so you'll double your impact as well. But I am absolutely delighted to introduce our special guest this evening, Kristy McBain. She's the member for Eden-Monaro and the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and the Territories. A mum to 3 kids. I will confess early on, not a conflict of interest, but we did go to university together at UC, University of Canberra. And she served as the Councillor for Bega Valley Shire Council from 2012 and as Mayor from 2016 to 2020, during which time she experienced floods and the community experienced the bushfires and, of course, COVID-19. So not a quiet time to be in politics, in local government. She was elected as the member for Eden-Monaro in 2020 and appointed a minister in 2022. A meteoric rise in politics. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, Kristy.
It's really lovely to be here. Thank you, Eb. And thank you to the Australia Institute for putting on Politics in the Pub in Queanbeyan. And as you can see from the near full house, you might have to do this more regularly. I don't know that you'd want me every time as your guest, but I'd be happy to oblige. We could talk about a whole range of things. Yeah,
well, we can discuss that afterwards, I reckon, because, it's a fabulous turnout tonight. So I did kind of want to start with a bit of breaking news, just because I happened to be there last night, but we saw Julian Assange released and is free now, something 14 years in the making at least. And we saw a personal thanks from his family to the Prime Minister. I imagine that kind of thing's been in the works for a little while, but quite a kind of a cross-partisan issue in the end for the Parliament.
Yeah, obviously, regardless of people's views on what Julian Assange did when he was with WikiLeaks, there were a cross-party panel who were very dedicated to trying to end the saga that has been Julian Assange. He's spent now 14 years holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London and then Belmarsh prison. He was charged with a crime in the US, but was not a resident of the US and wasn't in the US. So I think there were a number of people from across the political divide that wanted to see this brought to a close. And there's been some obviously very careful and steady negotiation that has been taking place over the last couple of years through the Prime Minister at that leader level, with the Foreign Minister, and obviously with now our High Commissioner to the UK and also our US Ambassador. So it's been a process which has now resulted in him pleading guilty to one charge, time served, and he made his way to Australia last night, which I think is the right conclusion. It is now finished, and as the Prime Minister had said, enough was enough. This was going nowhere. No one was going to get any justice out of this continuing, and it's really good that it's been brought to a close.
Yeah, and as you said, attracted to people from across the political spectrum, people like Barnaby Joyce here in Australia, to Andrew Wilkie, but also in the United States as well.
Yeah.
It really did become a big cause.
I'm not sure that you're going to get Barnaby Joyce and Monique Ryan agreeing on a lot, but they actually travelled together to Washington as part of a cross-party delegation, which also included Tony Zappia from the Labor Party. I think it's really interesting to see, even as you said, in US politics, which is much more divided than in Australia, people from across the political spectrum actually saying that it's time this came to an end.
Yeah, and I noticed Simon Birmingham having a bit of a crack at the PM this morning about greeting a felon. But in a few months, the United States might be led by a felon, so don't know how long that will last. But
no comment.
I did. I guess I wanted to kick off just by asking what attracted you to politics in the first place when you started back in local government.
Look, I'd always been interested in politics, but I never saw anyone like me in politics. And when you think about it, there have been very few women involved in federal politics, and growing up there wasn't a lot. We only just had our first female Prime Minister. And for anyone that's seen the play Julia, if you haven't, go and see it. I didn't even realise how horrendous that time was. Like, I knew it was bad, but I watched that play and I was like, wow. I'd always been interested, but I never knew how it worked. I didn't know how you became a member of a party or you got pre-selected. I never thought someone like me who grew up in a really small town and went to a really low socioeconomic high school would ever fit the mould. So, I'd watched Question Time heaps. I'd been involved a little bit in uni in some Labor things. And then I started my career and started a family, and all these other things were happening in my life. So, politics was something that I watched and engaged in, but I wasn't a part of. And then in 2012, I was on maternity leave. I had a 2.5-year-old and a 3-month-old, and there'd been a decision made about one of my local playgrounds. And at the time, my council, there was 9 representatives. There were 8 blokes, 1 woman. They're all over 55. I'm not being ageist, just saying.
Just the facts.
Just the facts. And I thought, I'm not sure how that's representative of me or the people that I'm engaging with. So I did a bit of research and found out that in 3 months' time there'd be a local government election, a council election. And my husband and I had just started a plumbing business 6 months ago. I was on maternity leave. And I went, oh, bugger this, I'm going to nominate. And so I went home and I said to my husband, I just nominated for council. And he went, we have no time for this. And I said, don't worry, I won't get elected. Turns out I did. And I rocked up to my first ever council workshop, and the council met on a Tuesday afternoon at 2:00. And I rocked up with Max in the pram at the time, and I said, I can't do Tuesdays. And I'm pushing this pram back and forth, and I've got these other people staring at me going, well, that's when we meet. And I said, well, that's okay, we can change it. And they said, no, we can't change it because everyone knows we meet on a Tuesday. And I said, it's okay, we'll tell them we meet on a Wednesday instead. Anyway, I eventually got 4 other people to vote with me, still pushing the pram, to change it to a Wednesday. But that was the result of over a week's negotiation with people to get it changed one day. And I had to explain, I actually don't have childcare on a Tuesday. Like, I can't make it work unless you want a baby here. In the end, Max ended up being with me for about another 6 or so months in council. And then I got pregnant and had a 3rd kid. Which was hilarious. There was a man sitting next to me who saw me breastfeeding once and his eyes nearly fell out of his head. And then when I got pregnant, the mayor said to me at the time, oh, so you'll be off for a while now. And I said, no, I'll be back in 2 months. And he said, no, you won't. I've had kids. You'll be off for a while. I said, not sure if you realise this is my 3rd. I'll be back in a couple of months. So my last meeting was, I think it was the 3rd of December. I had Jack on the 17th of December, and then I was back for the February meeting, and I walked in with Jack, and he was like, I said, it's all right. Not going to fall over. My brain didn't fall out. I can still do the job. So that's how I got involved. It was an accidental election.
And then, as I mentioned, like your community, as with a lot of communities around Australia, but went through a whole series of natural disasters and then the pandemic. That must have been, local government, you really kind of at the coalface there and dealing with your local community, people face to face. And I'm just really thinking here of the bushfires in particular. It was engulfing the whole of the South Coast, but I really remember watching you on the news kind of evacuating whole towns, just like, you got to get out, like at the end of this meeting, that's what you got to do kind of thing. What was that like to be having those kinds of conversations with the communities when everything is so fast moving and things were going so badly wrong?
Just before I became the mayor, there was an East Coast low on the coast, and we had a 17-metre wave take out some infrastructure. And I thought to myself, oh my God, that would be terrible. And then I became the mayor, and then there were 9 declared natural disasters. Okay. The Black Summer bushfires were really different. We'd had 2 other bushfires in my time as mayor. The Black Summer bushfires were incredibly different because it was sort of engulfing the entire East Coast. And normally in an emergency situation, you have, your RFS or your police who are there doing a lot of communication with you. But because there were so few people around, we had to do a lot of it ourselves. And a massive shout out to my mate Ian Campbell up there, who was my partner in crime in most of the media that I did. And he arranged and interviewed and, hit the car with me for weeks on end. So a massive thank you to Ian. He did a fabulous job. But we made a bit of a plan. Like, people want to know that they're going to get regular updates. So we decided we'd do a morning lunch and an afternoon update, so that even if you didn't have, a bunch of new information, people knew to tune in, that there would be something that they could cling on to. We also, because lots of people didn't have power and didn't have access to technology, we had to, literally had people putting up posters to come to a town hall meeting in different parts of the electorate, of the council area. And they were not allowing anyone to pump fuel. Because I had to save it basically for our RFS. So we would sneak into the petrol station, and I'd have to jump out of the car and wave, and she'd be like, okay, and she'd turn the pump on because I was still driving back and forth. But the end message for a lot of people was, if you cannot protect your own life, then you need to move to an evacuation centre, or you need to move out of the area as soon as possible. And being the South Coast, we obviously have an influx of tourists over summer. So we had people from a lot of different places. And we also had a lot of people from Malakuta who had been evacuated from Victoria up to our shire. So I remember standing in an Eden town hall and, giving them the lines: if you cannot protect your own life, you need to leave. If you are not from this area, this highway will be open for a period of time, and we suggest you pack up now and go. And someone said to me, do we have enough appliances to save our town? And we said, this isn't about property protection anymore. If you cannot protect your own life, then you need to leave. And that was a big wake-up call for a lot of people, and a lot of people got really, really angry about that. Are you saying you won't protect my house? We're not saying that, but what we're saying is, you've got to look after yourself right now. We do not have enough personnel for, to protect all of the premises here. And I had one guy come up to me after the end of the meeting, and he said to me, I feel pretty safe. said, I'm camping with another family down at the caravan park. We feel pretty good. Do you think we'll be all right? And I looked at him and I said, oh, I'd pack up. And he said, no, but we feel pretty safe. And I said, all right, let me put it to you this way. If I didn't have to be here, I wouldn't be. I said, and you're in a tent? Embers are going to burn straight through that. So if I was you, I'd pack up your shit and hit the road. And he looked at me and went, oh, okay. And he took off, and his wife was following going, I told you. And I was like, okay. So sometimes people just need you to be like blunt. Really straight, like really blunt. You are. We had a similar town at the bottom of Brown Mountain. There's a little town called Bemboka, and we'd done this community hall meeting there. And as I walked in, I spoke to a lady and a gentleman, and they were in their early 70s, and they said, we feel pretty safe. We think we've got enough equipment around us. And I said, okay. And then we did a town hall meeting, and our district fire superintendent was there, John Cullen, a beautiful man, lives in that area as well. And he was explaining to people in the room what they would need to protect their properties. At the end of the meeting, she came back to me and she said, yeah, we're going to go. We have not enough equipment. We don't even have protective clothing. I don't know what I was thinking. I think it's really important to give people as much information as possible, but be really blunt with them.
Yeah, as an avid camper, I definitely wouldn't want to be in a tent when there's embers floating around.
No.
They're all synthetic. I remember having those same conversations. I was staying with my dad in Bomaderry at the time. He lives halfway up a mountain. And I was like, Dad, what's your bushfire plan? And he's like, well, if there's a bushfire, I get the F out. And I was like, great plan.
I think it's great, though, because my daughter is in Year 9. She came home the other day, and one of her assignments was to write a fire plan for the house. So that's how much that education piece now means in communities that have been bushfire impacted, that they're actually teaching kids from a really young age, you need a fire plan.
And it wasn't too long after that you kind of made the jump to federal politics. Obviously, the Black Summer bushfires were pretty devastating for Scott Morrison's prime ministership at the time, and there was a lot of backlash to that. But I'm really curious about that jump from local to federal politics and just how different that gear change was, I guess.
It was an accidental segue into federal politics, because it wasn't like I had an aim, to go into federal politics. I still didn't get the political system and how you got pre-selected. I'd done a lot of advocacy to state and federal members of parliament as a local mayor, and I knew Anthony Albanese through his I first met him when he was the Minister for Local Government, I think, back when I was a councillor, and then he was the Shadow Infrastructure Minister. So he'd come down to Eden, and I'd talk to him about the Port of Eden, and so we kind of knew each other already. I had that level of advocacy with him, and he flew in and he did this roundtable with small businesses in the electorate, in the council, post bushfires, and then he went to a couple of different places to talk to people that have been directly impacted, and he said, can we have a meeting before the roundtable? I said, yeah, absolutely, would love to. Then his flight was late, typical Rex flight fashion, and then if the flight was late, so he texted me to say, I'm sorry, the flight's late, can we catch up after the roundtable? I said, yep, no problem. And then they did some media, and the local member at the time and Elbow were going to a different part of the council area, and I was doing a recovery meeting with some agencies in the council, and they said, would you like to come? And I said, no, I've got a recovery meeting. And he said to me, can you meet me at the airport? I said, yeah, sure. And he's finished what he was doing. He's gone back to the airport at Merimbula. My recovery meeting ran late, and, I'm not about to pull up stumps for that. So I texted him and said, look, I'm running late. And he said, that's okay. So by the time I got to the airport, I literally pulled out the seat, sat down, and he said, so I wanted to, and they called his flight. And I was like, And he said, okay, I better make this quick. I wanted to give you this really big spiel about the Labor Party and how important Eden-Monaro is and why I think you should be the person to run. And I looked at him and I'm like, what? And he said, Mike Kelly's going to resign and I'd like you to run for the Labor Party. And I looked at him and went, I'm not a member of the Labor Party. And he said, I'll fix that. And I said, I don't have time to go through a pre-selection process. And he said, I'll fix that. And then I went, and he said, you're running out of things to say. And I was like, I don't know. And he said, I'll give you a week. And then, he boarded a flight. So I went home and talked to my husband and he was like, wow, that was out of the blue. And I was like, yeah. And then the week sort of came and went and he'd text a couple of times and then he rang me and I said, I don't know. And he said, I'll give you another week. And then I rang him halfway through the next week and I said, look, what's your plan B? Because, I've got kids. And he's like, I don't have a plan B. And I was like, oh, okay. And he's like, just think about it for a few more days. And I was like, okay. And then he was ringing one morning as I was trying to get the kids out of the house to the car to take them to the bus stop. And my husband was leaving for the morning to go to work. And he rang and I held up the phone and showed my husband. And he said, you've got to give him an answer. And I said, yeah, but the answer's no. Like, how do I say that? And then Brad said to me, why is the answer no? And I said, because we've got kids and we've got the business and we're really busy and it's a big electorate and it'll be hard. And he said to me, we can make anything work. If this opportunity never comes around again, are you going to be okay having said no the first time? And I was like, no. And he said, well, you need to say yes and we'll make it work.
Sounds like an amazing bloke.
He is. High five, Brad McBain.
Yeah. Imagine there's a lot of other women thought about running for Parliament whose conversations went a little bit differently with their partners over the years. You're now a minister for local government, like Albo was before, and regional development. And again, I guess I was going to say, coming from that local government where you really were at the coalface, has that been helpful in your role now as a minister dealing with local government and councillors in that role that you used to play?
Yeah, look, my view on politics is don't overcomplicate it. At the end of the day, you are there to be a community representative, and that should be pretty easy to do. And so I take the same view that I have for the local electorate that I do to the ministerial portfolio, and that is people want to talk to you. They want to know that you understand what you're telling them, particularly local government, where there is a specific sort of set of circumstances they're working in. And when they walk in the door and realise that they're not going to have to explain to me why this particular thing is an issue or why the budget is the way it is, it's a weight off their shoulders. So I just take the view that they're there to advocate for their community. Can I help them with an outcome? If I can't, explain why you can't, and work with the parameters you've got. Regional development is a really interesting one because it could be anything. I take the view that I do a bunch of stakeholder engagement. I do a lot of travel to regional areas. I talk to businesses and community associations and anyone across regional Australia about their specific regional issue, and then we pound the blue carpet in the ministerial wing talking to other ministers, because there's a regional element to all of the portfolios, whether that's housing or health or telecommunications. So I basically pound the hallways and tell them how their policy can be improved by having a specific regional bent on it.
We're going to take some questions from the audience shortly. We've got a microphone set up down here. We might need to lift that up a little bit. So if you want to start thinking about your questions for Kristy, we'll come to those in a minute. But obviously everyone at the moment is really struggling with cost of living, with rising prices in particular. The Australia Institute's done a lot of work around kind of price gouging from the supermarkets and how much profits have risen for big corporations in particular. And wages certainly aren't keeping up as much, although the government has done quite a bit, particularly around the minimum wage and for aged care workers and things. But we've just had the budget. I know the tax cuts are coming in, but for people who out there who are really struggling in the community at the moment, what are some of the key things that the government is doing to help?
So obviously, as you said, tax cuts are coming in a few short days' time for every taxpayer across the country. It's incredibly important that Stage 3 was adjusted so that people who were on $45,000 or less were getting nothing under the Stage 3 tax cuts. That's all been recalibrated now. So 85% of the population will now be better off under the tax cut plan that we've put in place. One of the things that I was super happy with in the budget was the cap on medicines. So for pensioners and concession card holders, they won't pay more than $6.60 for their medicines for the next 5 years. So it's been capped. Everyone else on PBS medicines, we brought the price down from $42.50 to $30 as part of our election commitment. And each year it sort of goes up by CPI, but we've said there will not be a CPI increase on those medicines for the next 12 months, which is important. Rent assistance, the first time there has been 2 budgets in a row where there's been rent assistance increases has been under us, and that's incredibly important because we know rents are going up, particularly for those people on fixed incomes. The childcare measures that have been put in place, I think, are incredibly important, and the data shows us that on average people's fees are dropping by about 11%. There's still more work to do in that system, but it is really important. In this budget also was a provision for a pay increase for childcare workers. It's very hard to attract people into sectors when they're not valued for the work they're doing. So aged care work increases were very important, and this budget goes through to help childcare wages increase as well. One of the things that hasn't been largely picked up but is incredibly important to an electorate like this one, where we've got over 6,000 veterans in the electorate, is the money that we've put into Veterans Affairs. Previously, someone would put in a claim and it would take over 400 days to even get assigned to someone. So not be assessed, just assigned to someone. And now we've got that assignment process down to 6 days, and most people's claims are sorted within 60. It is a real blight on government when you praise people for the work they do in your Defence Force but don't value the work that they've done when they move into that civilian life or as a veteran. So some of those things I think are incredibly important and show the values of the Labor Party.
I'll just tell people, if you've got a question for Kristy, if you can start perhaps lining up over here near the steps, and I'll just ask you to ask Kristy your question, and we'll go from there. Don't worry, if you don't have questions, I've got plenty more that we can ask. But please feel free to think of a question and come and start lining up over here if you've got one. I wanted to come back to the bushfires and to climate change. The Australia Institute has done a lot of research around here. We know during the coalition government, for the whole time that they were in government, really struggled to hold on to an energy policy for a long time. And
they only had 22. Give them a break.
It's like they weren't even trying.
Yeah.
And obviously the Labor government is having to play a lot of catch up to really particularly get that investment in renewables. But we've also seen, we've got to make the transition, and the government still is approving things like new gas pipelines, new gas wells, new coal mines. The United Nations, the climate scientists say we have to start moving away from fossil fuels. When are we going to start to see that shift?
Yeah, I think over the last 2 years, we've seen obviously more renewable projects be ticked off than any other. I think the ratio is now 7 renewable energy projects that have been ticked off to 1 coal or gas project since we came to government. There's been 54 renewable energy projects ticked off in the last 2 years, and we have now, for the first time ever, more renewable energy projects in the pipeline than coal or gas projects in the pipeline. But I guess we've got to be realistic and pragmatic about making sure we can make that transition across our communities. we are going to need traditional sources of energy until we get to a tipping point where we've got more firmed renewables in the system. We don't have that yet. We are obviously accelerating that through a range of our own measures, and the Future Made in Australia, the $22.7 billion plan outlined in the budget, was all about trying to engage the renewable sector in a way where people will actually come in and invest in Australia. We have every critical mineral we need to build a solar panel, yet we send all of our unprocessed materials offshore and import everything back at a higher price. So we really want to make sure that we can capitalise on the transition that's happening around the world by putting some dollars behind it. We're never going to compete with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. I think their plan was about $350 billion. But we have every critical mineral that we need right here in this country to do it well. We've also got, I think, the technical expertise to do it well. We invented solar panels, but it was commercialised somewhere else because we didn't put our money where our mouth was. We also invented rapid antigen tests.
Didn't know that. There you go.
Yeah. A couple of guys from Queensland, but the Australian government wouldn't back that. So they went to the US, and it was backed before it even had TGA approval. They set up a factory.
Yeah, no, I do remember that now.
Yep, all of it. So far too often we're way too slow to recognise the expertise, the skill that we have in our own country. So we're putting dollars behind it because we want people to be able to commercialise their ideas, and we want to be able to commercialise our resources much better for that transition.
Yeah. I just can't believe I forgot that. Does everyone else feel like the pandemic was a bit of a black hole of time? Like, I can't now remember if something was 5 years ago or
memory's gone dark.
5 months ago.
For anyone who's a teacher, is there any teachers in this room? You're a teacher, weren't you, Tracy? Oh no, I know you. We've got one. High five to the teachers. I tried the learning from home biz. Did not go well. And I can just, all I can say is my respect for teachers went through the roof after the learning from home period. So to all the teachers out there, thank you.
Big congratulations and thank you. We've got our first question.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Kristy. You did mention Julia Gillard and how shocked you were at her treatment. That's now 12, 14 years ago. What's your experience been? Do you have you suffered any misogyny in Parliament? And how different do you think the experience will be for our next female Prime Minister?
Thank you. It is a really great question. Julia Gillard is a bit of a hero of mine. A, because she was the first female Prime Minister. B, because she's an incredibly intelligent woman. C, she got through more legislation in a minority parliament than anyone before her. And D, we share a birthday. And she also wrote me a letter after I got elected, and I was like, oh my God. Which is really funny. I also have those moments like of massive imposter syndrome. You know, like Penny Wong will walk over and talk to me, and I still go like, Hi, Penny. I have found at times working in politics can be challenging, even in this day and age. I've had people yell across the chamber at me, I don't know about regional people. My electorate's bigger than yours. Yes, literally. That I wouldn't have been elected if not for John Barilaro. I don't know. I've also had some really interesting people send me Facebook messages. Some involve the C word, it's 4 letters. Others are, can we go out? Would you like to go out sometime? You must be lonely at night. Mostly though, like my experience in Parliament House has been incredibly different to I think a lot of other people's. We are a caucus that's over 50% women. The tone is very, very different. You can see from a number of policies that are passed, like we don't have to talk about why a policy that might impact women more is a good thing, because we get it. I think there are some shifts happening. I had a high school kid come and do some work experience with me, and he and his mum sat in question time, and after it she came to the office and she said, there's a really stark difference in the chamber. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, well, on one side there's like lots of colour, you know, like lots of suits and, you know, dresses and, you know, laughing, and on the other side it's very serious. And targets and quotas are not a bad thing. They're not a dirty word. And I think at some point in the future, the coalition are going to have to look at putting in targets to get more women in Parliament. At the moment, they've got 9 out of 55 in the lower house, and it does really change the way in which they interact in the chamber.
Yeah, so do you think the next time we have a female Prime Minister, it will be a very different experience? Has the country learned its lesson from the Julia Gillard years?
I'd like to say yes, and I'd like to hope it's yes, that we've learnt the difference and we've learnt that things need to change. Sometimes when I look at the coverage of Brittany Higgins, though, I am not convinced that we will have learnt that lesson. So I'm hopeful. I mean, you can even see the furor over the change in the Governor-General's salary.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
God forbid a woman get a pay rise.
Yeah, God forbid a woman got a pay rise. And the reason it is because the last, I think, 2 Governor-Generals had a military pension. That's why they were paid less, because they also had another income to draw upon. No one bats an eyelid when the Chief Justice of the High Court is being paid that amount. So I'd like to say yes. I like to hope it's yes. And I will definitely be in there fighting to call it out much quicker than it was called out last time.
And just a note on the number of women in the Liberal Party, the proportion, the Australian Institute looked into this, the proportion of women has increased, but that's only because so many Liberal blokes got voted out at the last election, changed the proportions a little bit. Do you have a question? Yeah, please, come on.
Hi, Kristy. I'm Liz.
Hi, Liz.
I'm from Goulburn.
Oh, hey!
Hey! Yeah, I just wanted to know your view on amalgamations of councils, local councils. With Goulburn, we tried to do it with the Upper Lachlan and it didn't go through. What's your view on amalgamations of smaller councils?
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting one. The New South Wales government went through this process of trying to amalgamate councils. I think it was back in 2015, 2016. And they did not do it well because there wasn't enough community consultation. They went through this weird process called Fit for the Future. So every council had to run through a range of challenges and assessments to see whether they were fit for the future on these 4 measures. And then following that, the New South Wales government never actually released the report to show us how people were being measured, and made a series of decisions forcibly amalgamating some communities. Cootamundra Gundagai has just been de-amalgamated through the Boundaries Commission. The Snowy Valleys, which is the Tumut and Tumbarumba community, have gone to the Boundaries Commission to put a proposal forward. There's no doubt in my mind that amalgamations might work, but there has to be a proper process where there is consultation, where there is help and assistance given. Just forcibly amalgamating people doesn't actually mean you end up with economies of scale, because you need people there to make it work. And if the people aren't convinced, then they're not going to try to make it work for you.
Thank you. Next question.
Kirsty, you mentioned that, we have the skills, etc., and the resources in Australia to really be on top of lots of things. A few weeks ago, we had a speaker from an astrophysicist, Brad, and I've forgotten his surname.
Brad Tucker.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. And his information was really mind-blowing. When you put that together with, I'm an avid reader of Pearls and Irritations daily, and when I listened to Brad and the future of defence, etc., what I heard from him is the fact that getting a submarine in 2050 which matches warfare of the 1940s, so it's 100 years out of date, given that it might be nuclear, but still the basic instrument is 100 years out of date. Satellites, drones, etc., can do far more than a nuclear submarine. And I feel we are just building submarines as great burial caskets for, unfortunately, the people that are crewing them. Is the Labor government taking any notice of the informed opinions that are coming from different elements of society?
Thank you. Yeah, look, it's a really important question, and it's not an either-or proposition. It's clear to me that the future of warfare is going to be a little bit different, and we do need to invest dollars in drone technology, in laser technology, in satellites. I think the figures are we're putting up like 1,000 satellites a day right across the world for a whole range of reasons. So it's really important that we're keeping ourselves abreast of those technologies. But it's not an either-or proposition. As an island nation, we've got to make sure that we can defend ourselves, but it's not just us anymore. We've got a wider region that we really need to make sure that we play a role in, and we can see in the Pacific, for example, if we are not helping our friends and neighbours for a variety of reasons, we'll have other countries that come in and attempt to help them out and service them. And we cannot let that happen for a whole range of reasons. Submarines will need to play a part in our future protection. It is very different, I think, now to have long-range submarines than it was back in the 40s, where it was a very short-range submarine. And it will be very different. We won't need a whole range of land-based vehicles like we previously have had. That is not going to be where we find ourselves. But the potential is that we need to play a role in the Pacific and in our wider region, and we've got to keep our nation safe. As someone who's a very pragmatic person, I think it's important that we cover all of our bases. And that means we've got to make sure that we're prepared with technology, which is laser, drones and satellites. We've got to make sure that we've got long-range submarine capability. We're an island nation. We've got to make sure that we've got long-range missiles. That's the future that we will find ourselves in, and we can't be caught short or left wanting.
Next question, thank you.
Hi. Recently there was a by-election, or I think it was last weekend in New South Wales, for the state
Yes,
government.
state seat, yep.
And we had a by-election in Cook for federal
Yep.
government, but Labor did not put up a candidate in either electorate. What's the strategy behind that? Because if I was a Labor voter, who would I vote for? Are we too scared to think that we don't want to lose and we put up a candidate? Because I would feel it's almost a bit of contempt for people who want to vote Labor. They're not going to vote Labor again. That's my question. Do you know what the strategy was behind that?
Well, I'm not sure about the state election. Obviously, the federal by-election in the seat of Cook. I think the thoughts were on that was we were unlikely to change votes. And it was important to make sure that we were keeping our dollars close for potential electorates that we can turn and win come the next federal election. I'm not part of party office, and I'm sure there's a wider strategy, but my understanding was that Cook was not seen as an area that we were going to win in the by-election, and they wanted to make sure that when you spend your dollars, you can do it in a way that you can change votes and win electorates.
Thanks. Next question.
Hi, Kristy. Judith Miller. Is that all right? Can you hear me? This is a bit out of left field, but it's also a question for the Australia Institute, really. When I saw that you were having this talk, and the title was Mum, Mayor, Member and Minister, and I thought, well, what would a man, would you start such a talk with Dad? And just the language is so important, and I know it doesn't rhyme. I couldn't think of what Dad could be, but I just wondered what the thinking is behind putting Mum first, or why not? Why wouldn't we do that with a dad?
I actually suggested it, Judith.
That's fine. I'm not.
Yeah, and the reason I did is because I think far too often we focus on what someone's profession is, rather than focusing on who they are outside this place. And I am, I had a whole different life before I became a mayor and a member and a minister. And a large part of that, and something that I was also really proud to get a title of, was Mum. So we actually suggested it.
Do you think that the men are not proud of being dads then, because they would never have suggested
I actually think that it's probably not something that occurs to a lot of blokes, that it's a title that you can be proud of and that you've achieved. There are lots of men and women out there who, unfortunately, for a range of reasons, won't get those titles, and that's incredibly sad for a lot of people. For a lot of people, it's a choice. That was my choice to have kids, and it was my choice to make sure it was in a title.
But I take your point too. I said I take that point on board. I think it's a good one. And, we do a lot of research at the Australian Institute to look at the gender inequality gap on a range of things. So it's not unimportant to us in our research and things like that as well. But I think it's a really good point. And I'll note I've got a person here in the front row that I know used to work in the Federal Press Gallery. I have noticed that when there's a change in leadership at the top now, oftentimes journalists will ask dads with kids at home. I've heard a couple of journos ask them, how are you going to manage, that question that women politicians get all the time. Not all the time, but you do notice it a bit more.
Exactly. Having said that, I go to meetings sometimes and people say to me, how are the kids going? With that face. Or, where are the kids? And I've literally done that. Oh, shit, I left him at the airport.
I'll be right back.
Oh, hold on.
Thanks very much. Have we got the next question there? Thank you.
Hey, Kristy.
Hi, Tim.
Just for those that don't know me, I'm Tim Nicholson. I'm also standing for Labor Party for council election coming up. Thank you. 80% of what we do as politicians happens behind the scenes, and very little happens in Parliament House or in council chambers. How does that change when you're in opposition to when you're in government?
Well, I don't think it really does, right? Like, as I said, the very core of my job is community advocacy. So it's, showing up at the Roos on the weekend, turning a sod on $1 million change room. It's working with Respite for Queanbeyan to try to get them some dollars. It's working with parts of the community to make sure that we can assist or connect them with other people. The job in Parliament is a little bit different. It's either about making connections for your community or passing legislation that will impact your community, or speaking about it so you can highlight something that's happening in your community. So it is a little bit different. It is all connected though. The thing that people don't see and probably don't care about is, the arguing that happens internally about trying to get the policy up in the first place, and, wrangling over, these two words. Like, no, it should be this, it should be that. Those things people won't see, and they shouldn't see. No one needs to know how the sausage is made. They just want the sausage at the end of the day. A lot of it does go unseen, but most of it, I think, is the showing up, the being part of the community, the trying to help and connect and resolve issues for people.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi Kristy, my name's Jo. I'm from the non-Queanbeyan part of the electorate of Eden-Monaro, Merimbula and the Snowy Mountains. I had 2 questions tonight, but I'm going to go for the easy one.
Okay.
The redistribution, Goulburn's now in the game, and that actually Queanbeyan has always been what has tended to tip Eden-Monaro in terms of being the not so much a bellwether seat anymore. So without the Snowy Valleys, how is Goulburn going to change that dynamic?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really interesting question. So there's been a redistribution in New South Wales. Eden-Monaro loses the Snowy Valleys, but also loses Yass and Murrumbateman. They all now become part of Riverina. If you ask the people of Yass and Murrumbateman, they will not see themselves as part of Riverina, but anyway, that's by the by. And for the first time in 40 years, Goulburn Mulwaree comes back into the seat of Eden-Monaro. It's made the seat a lot longer north to south, but it is skinnier east to west. So, you know, swings and roundabouts, right? Goulburn has been part of the Hume electorate for a long period of time. And to your question earlier, Hume has never been a target seat for the Labor Party. So when you overlay the 2022 federal election data, you know, the Labor vote was not as strong in that area. But then when you look at the 2023 state election data, where the state seat of Goulburn was a target electorate, you can see the votes quite substantially change. So I guess what it shows to me is if you show up and you're serious about campaigning, you are likely to switch votes. Goulburn is an area, when I was the deputy chair of the Canberra Region Joint Organisation, so it was 10 councils around the ACT and the ACT government. Goulburn was in our group. And so I'd done a lot of advocating for Goulburn as part of that group because we had a joint infrastructure prospectus. I know the mayor there really well. I know the former mayor pretty well. And there's a whole range of things that I've been to Goulburn for because I've got kids. So rep basketball in Goulburn is a thing that I've been to quite a number of times. So it will be interesting. On paper, my margin shrinks by about 1.8%, so it's just over 6%. So I'll have to go and do a lot of work, and I'm not afraid of hard work. It will mean more time on the road, but it will play a role in what the end margin is. But hopefully with some targeted campaigning there, we can make sure that Goulburn votes Labor.
Thank you. And we've got one last question. Thank you.
Lovely to meet you, Kristy. I love playgrounds, by the way. Now, I just wasn't quite satisfied with the answer to the gas question.
Yep.
For instance, the Japanese government said that they could not take the sovereign risk of not having the gas go ahead in the Northern Territory. And I'm sure, as you've explained, you know all too well the sovereign risk to us and the rest of the world of not doing something more about climate change. So I'm just wondering, how do we, when we open new gas now, how do we tell them it's time to shut it down when we've got through that hump? And also, in relation to the Northern Territory, why should it go ahead when it's just such a problem, and obviously traditional owners are not happy with it?
So in regards to Beetaloo Basin, you're talking about? Yep. So there's been some consultation work with First Nations owners. Whether that consultation work has been enough or not, I think, is the issue that's currently at play. And we had some traditional owners in Parliament House in the last sitting period, in the autumn sitting period, talking to a whole range of people. One of the things that I think is really important is that if we are talking about new coal and gas, we are talking about domestic supply and not international supply. It's been a huge change for us to make sure that we can regulate and make sure we keep domestic gas supply for our own market before it goes offshore. There are a range of contracts in place where domestic gas supply or storage was not a part of any development processes. It's really important that if we are doing new coal and gas, that we do have domestic supply. We do have to make sure that we've got firmed renewables in place to take over from coal and gas. We do not have enough firmed renewables at this point in time. We don't have enough storage options at this point in time either. We are working on trying to get more into the system, but we can only process them as quick as they come in, and they all have to go through their own environmental process. We can't skip one over and say, don't worry about the environmental credentials. All of them have to go through the proper planning and environmental processes. There's more to do. There's no question about it. We are going to be really racing against time to meet our 2030 target, but we need more projects coming online, not less. There's no simple, easy answer. If we're not opening up some new coal and gas, then we are going to have intermittent power supply because we do not have enough firmed renewables in the system right now to take over.
I will just add to that in my prerogative as host to say that the Australia Institute's done a huge amount of work on this. We're obviously very critical. We think there should be no new fossil fuel projects open. That's what the science demands. That's where we need to be going. And I would also just say to Kristy's point though about exports, that's a really big thing. Australia, we never used to export gas overseas. We used to have a shit ton of gas and cheap gas available here domestically. Successive governments supported linking us to the world market. Now we export 80% of our gas. So there is no shortage. We have an abundance of gas. We just export it all overseas and we let the gas companies get away with it. They're more worried about fulfilling their contracts with Japan and Korea than looking after households in Australia. They're also making a friggin' mozza. They got windfall profits since the war on Ukraine from Russia, and we're actually importing back, and paying the world price for it. So it's a disaster a long time in the making, but we should at least be, I'll just put the hard word on the minister while she's with me, even though she's not the treasurer or the resources minister. We could be getting some more money out of those gas companies for sure to help pay for all the, the transition itself, as well as all the services and things that we need. And check out australiainstitute.org.au for some of our research on that, because half of the gas, more than half that we export overseas, is royalty free. We're not even paying royalties on it. It's a disaster. I think we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Kristy, for an amazing night. Thanks everyone for your amazing questions. Kristy, how can people stay in touch with what you're doing, either as a minister or a local member?
Well, like any good politician, you can follow me on socials, Instagram, Twitter. Oh, no, it's not Twitter anymore, X.
I never
Instagram, X. Facebook, website, kristymcbain.com.au. I've got an office just down there and one in Bega. But I've also got staff members here. Lee, Stephen, Noah. And we've also got some material just at the back there. If anyone wants to buy a Kristy McBain hoodie, feel free. They're comfy, warm. It is winter. There is an election coming in 2025.
Thank you very much for all your questions this evening. Thanks for coming out on a cold evening, and thanks for coming to Queanbeyan and supporting us to hold this event tonight. We really appreciate it.
And
thanks very much,
massive
everyone.
Thanks to Ebony and the Australia Institute.
Thanks for watching. We love that we can make these videos free to watch, but they're not free to make. It's thanks to our generous supporters that we can keep making research and content that changes minds. So, if you like what we do, please consider giving to the Australia Institute so we can keep doing it. Visit our website australiainstitute.org.au and click the donate button to see how your support can help fund high quality research that matters.